And so if you are joining us today, you are here for digital tools to collect evidence of student learning. And our session is only an hour long today, and it's going to fly by really, really quickly, but hope to provide you with some ideas and ways in which you can embed some of these digital tools into your instructional practice as a way to gather evidence of student learning. And so I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Heather Rotterman, and I'm an assessment and instruction consultant with Wayne Risa. And I'll go ahead and let my co-facilitator, back channeler, introduce himself.
Unmute myself. Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Psycho. I'm the instructional technology consultant at Wayne Risa, and I'll be monitoring the chat and answering questions where I can. And if I can't, I will let Heather know that there's a question that needs answering.
So the topics that we are going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the formative assessment process, what it is, what we mean when we say formative assessment process. We're going to talk a little bit about intentional planning, and then we're going to provide some digital tools that are connected to some techniques that might be helpful in your practice moving forward for the school year. All right, so we've created a Jamboard, and what we're going to do is I'm asking two questions. The first question is, what are some of the routines or strategies that you use in your classroom or your practice to gather evidence to move student learning forward? And then my second question is, what is your level of comfort of selecting a digital tool to collect that evidence? So I'm actually going to stop share just a second and show you the Jamboard, and Jason's going to drop that Jamboard link in. Okay, so the first question is the first board in our Jamboard. So what are your routines or strategies for gathering evidence? And if Jamboard is new to you, there's a text box that you can click on and actually free type in. There's also the sticky note that you can type in as well, and you can change the colors. The second question, if you click on our arrow up here, it'll actually take you to another board. And this is where you can actually grab one of these dots and put it on the continuum here of a thumbs up or a thumbs down with your level of comfort in selecting a digital tool.
And we're right around that magic number of 20-ish for Jamboard, where it starts to get a little glitchy. So if you find yourself and Jamboard's not responding, just wait a minute, and as people step off, maybe they can just watch the screen, and then they will then you can go back to it and add your responses.
Yeah, that is something to consider when you're selecting a digital tool, the limitations of it, and for how many can access it. And that is something to note about Jamboard. Although I did think I read somewhere, correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, that I thought they were trying to make the limit on Jamboard larger.
Possibly. I forget if they're trying to expand it. And then there's also that variant of whether or not the organization has Google Workspace for Education Free or Google Workspace for Education Enterprise.
All right. And so if you haven't already done the question, go ahead and move yourself to the second question, which is where you can grab any one of those little pretty dots and just drag it onto the line of where you are feeling comfortable selecting the digital tool. Okay, so some of the routines that I'm seeing on the board, this is actually a really nice technique for me, a strategy for me to see where everybody is at in terms of the strategies or techniques that you use inside your own practice. So I'm seeing classroom observations and exit tickets. Okay, yes to classroom observation. It's one of those things that we really don't take into consideration when we're thinking about gathering evidence, but we really should be doing it more often through intentionally designed classroom observations. And when I talk about classroom observations, I mean like the teacher observing students engaged in a task or engaged in a discussion or something like that, not necessarily an administrator walking into a classroom. So I love this. So interest inventories, pre-tests. Okay, prior knowledge, this is great. I'm seeing a lot of exit tickets. Okay. Jamboards are great tools to use. Nearpod, collaborative breakout room spaces so kids can engage in discussion. I'm excited to see Google Forms and how it can be used in different ways. This is excellent. And then our music teacher, yes, listening. This is a great technique. Awesome. And then I think maybe we might have some world language teachers on the call. Listening probably happens in your classroom too. I'm seeing Laura shake her head, nod her head. Yes, thank you. All right, these are all excellent. This is a good start for us today. And then looking at our level of comfort, we're kind of all over the place here, which is really good, that's good for today's session. I'm seeing some closer to the thumbs down, seeing some right around hovering over the middle, and then feeling really good about what they're doing in the classroom. Would anyone like to come off of mute and share where you placed your dot and why?
Well, I placed mine kind of towards the upper side of the middle because I've gotten a lot more comfortable over the past year and a half of the pandemic. And due to that, it's like I've never been uncomfortable with technology, but I always stuck within a certain level of technology that was most comfortable. And this forced me to stretch my horizons, but there's always something new. And that's why I'm always doing this, because I want to see if there's something new that I don't know about yet. I'm just kind of multitasking, so I'm doing everything in bland format instead of coloring it, because I need to have my eyes in two places, but I want to be mostly here. And things. So I'm kind of like viewing other things while, but you know, I just know I'm real comfortable, but there's always room for growth. And I'm going to mute now so that other people can talk, because I talk too much.
Thank you, Laura. Absolutely. There's always room for growth. And like I said, some of the things I'm going to show you today, or you're going to actually get to participate in, are probably not new, but just getting you to think about how we might incorporate this using some of those techniques that you are already really comfortable with in your classroom. Would anyone else like to unmute and maybe share where they placed their dot and why? Okay. Using the power of wait time, I'm going to move on, but if you haven't had an opportunity to hop on, just due to the amount of people on the Jamboard, we will send you this link so you have opportunities to hop on it later at a later time. All right, so we're going to get into a little bit deeper with what we mean when we talk about the formative assessment process. And I always like to start, when I talk about assessment in general, I really like to start with the origin of the word assess. And I'm kind of like a word nerd in a way. I originally wanted to be a Spanish teacher, believe it or not. So I like to find out the origins of words. And when I dug a little deeper into the origin of the word assess, I found out that it's a Latin root, sedere, and it really means to sit beside. And when we think about the way that assessment, or the word assess, is used in education, especially nowadays, it often has a really negative connotation, right? Like it makes us some teachers might cringe or pull back a little bit because of all of the things that are tied to assessment, right? Like evaluations, right? Accountability measures, students being held back. All of those things kind of aren't very good feeling, and they leave a bad taste in our mouths when we think about assessment. But the origin, sedere, means to sit beside. So when we think about assessment in the classroom level, we're really sitting beside our students to gather information, to observe them inside the environment as they engage in learning and their work. So it really is more of a positive connotation. So I'd like you to consider that as we move through today, that we're really wanting to learn about what our students know and are able to do with our content. And so if you were in my session yesterday, and I see a couple of familiar names and faces, we talked about this idea that, that assessment is really the bridge between teaching and learning. And this is because it's a core process within instruction. And we, as educators, are working to create these environments, these classroom environments. We're engineering them to be effective for our students. And one of the ways in which, and Dylan Willem talks about this all the time, but one of the things that he talks about with this bridge between teaching and learning is that a key feature of an effective learning environment is that they create student engagement, and it allows teachers, learners, and their peers to ensure that the learning is moving in the intended direction, right? We want learning to move forward. And the only way to know if learning is moving in the right direction is through assessment. So we do this in our classroom in informal and informal ways, but the power that comes from the research around formative assessment process is the intentionality around our planning and when and how and what we're going to do with the evidence that we've gathered, and then the opportunities to interpret that evidence, make necessary adjustments, and provide students feedback in order to move that learning in the right direction. And so our focus for this session today is really honing in on the classroom level of assessment. And so we are going to only focus in, and that's why there's that pink box around my chart here. We're really focusing in on the classroom level of assessment because it provides low stakes, but high value information to us as teachers so that we can move forward with the learning. So the whole idea of the formative assessment process as a practice, as an instructional practice in our classrooms, is to answer the question, what comes next in the learning? And so what you'll see here from the definition that we use in Michigan, and what you'll see around the key decision makers, you'll notice that students are very much a part of this process. And we want to include students as decision makers, but also as consumers of their own assessment information, because they also need to know where they are at in the learning in relation to that learning goal or that learning target, because then they have to interpret that feedback that we give them in order to adjust, make necessary adjustments to their own work. So it's important that we note that formative assessment process is not just for teachers, but it's also for our students as well. So this also might look a little familiar if you were with me yesterday, but when we talk about this, the process itself, it really centers around 3 questions. Where are we going? What do my students understand now? And then how do we get to the learning target or that learning goal? So if we start with where are we going, this is where we take on that instructional planning. So we're really considering our content standards, where we're going to strategically place checks for understanding, and how we're going to involve our students in that. We're also being mindful of maybe utilizing some models that can provide students with an idea of what proficiency can look like. And sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to show a student a model because they might copy that model. But research has shown that students actually prefer to have a model because you're showing me what I need to see, what proficiency looks like, rather than telling me. We also, during this Where Are We Going, we're engaging in instruction using a variety of strategies that we do day in and day out. And then we're kind of looking to see how students are responding to our instruction. And they do this through lots of different ways. They interact with the content, which provides us with insight into maybe some misunderstandings, some misconceptions, or maybe a level of understanding of the content. When we get to this second question around what do my students understand now, this is where we've engaged in an evidence gathering opportunity. We're interpreting how the students have maybe responded to some instruction, and we're using it to see where they are at with their understanding. And so this point, we're really kind of monitoring where our students are at in the learning, and we're tracking their progress. We're also along the way making appropriate adjustments as needed based on the information that we've received. We're also continuing to give students feedback, whether it be individual, whole group, or small group feedback, in order to continue to move them forward. And this last question, how do we get to the learning target? This is where, again, we're continuing with our feedback practices, but we're also offering students an opportunity to ask themselves where they are at in their learning. Where are they at now in relation to the learning target? What are they going to do in terms of their learning tactics that might need to be adjusted in order to get to the learning target? And this really speaks to really building student self-efficacy, and they're putting some onus and responsibility on the student to take responsibility in their learning. So having students engage in a self-assessment is a really powerful and easy technique to do within the classroom to build up their motivation and engagement. And then the last one is how do we engage our students in peer-to-peer feedback? I actually did a blitz session on Monday around feedback literacy, and we talked extensively about peer feedback, and that recording is going to be available. And there are some strategies in there that might be helpful too. But it doesn't happen overnight with the peer-to-peer feedback. You have to actually practice it, model it, practice, model again, so that students are used to actually critiquing the work against some sort of success criteria or some levels of proficiency, and using that language of proficiency and success criteria when they're looking at another student's work. And then you'll notice with the arrows, the process continues, right? So we don't, it's a seamless process, but it starts and stops when we enter and exit into units of study, right? As we hone in on that process, those 3 questions, the entire time we're clarifying our intended learning, we're eliciting evidence. So we're creating opportunities for students, varied opportunities for students to show us what they know and are able to do. We're taking time as teachers to interpret that evidence. This can be done moment by moment if it's done within the middle of a lesson cycle, or it can be over the course of several lessons. And then we're determining what we're going to do with that information. And this last leaf of the clover over here, this acting on evidence, this is the part that researchers have found teachers sometimes struggle with. We know what the evidence is telling us that our kids need, but I'm not sure where I go next. So when we're talking about selecting a digital tool today, we want to make sure that it really helps you to understand what your students need, but also supports what your instructional next moves might be. With formative assessment, kind of as a practice in a nutshell, we're going to engage in a 5-word summary. And this is a technique that I like to use with students, but I also like to use it with adults too, because it's something you can certainly take back into your classrooms and use as a mid-checkpoint. Compose a 5-word summary of your understanding of the formative assessment process. And there's 3 ways that you can get to Mentimeter. I love Mentimeter. It's a quick way to, you can do a poll through Mentimeter. You can ask a multiple choice question. I'm leaving it a little open-ended, so you'll see how that'll look in just a moment. You can either go to menti.com and type in that code, and you can even do it from your phone or mobile device. You can click on the link in the chat that Jason's going to throw in, or you can open up your photo app on your cell phone, and you can hover over the QR code. So 5-word summary of your understanding of the formative assessment process. So when I show digital tools, I like to show ones that are free. So this one is free. I think there is a paid version for it, so you can only do so many slides at a time. This is considered a slide. But what's nice is that I can quickly see where everybody is at with their understanding of formative assessment process. And if I have to, based on the responses here, I could go back and maybe do some reteaching around the formative assessment process, or maybe answer any questions that students might have. or maybe clarify any misunderstandings or misconceptions that students might have. So let's see what we have here. Jason, what are some things that you're seeing?
I think you're looking at things related to what they know and measuring progress. You see a lot of words like growth and progress and understanding. Yeah.
I love ongoing assessment to adjust instruction. This is a good one. I like these. Summary of what students have learned, collect evidence to adapt instruction. Yes, teaching is adaptive, isn't it? We are constantly shifting. I remember when I would plan, I would always plan for a plan B, but then a plan C and D and E, because I had an idea. I anticipated what my students might need, but sometimes they surprise you. Ongoing used to inform instruction. So I asked you to do a 5-word summary, but this could certainly be adapted for older students or younger students. So I've seen younger students maybe draw a picture and maybe put a couple words related to it, like kindergarten. I've seen older students, you can challenge them to a 5-word summary, but I've also seen like upper L and middle school students do like a 7-word summary. So this is a great technique that you can do very quickly in the classroom. And you can even display this if you have a smart board or a projector, you could display this. So even kids could even talk about their answers. So you could even call on a student or ask a student to share what they were thinking and why. And then maybe call on other students to build upon that student's answer. These are excellent. Real-time comprehension check-ins. These are great. All right, so you're probably starting to see how I've crafted this presentation, that you've engaged in some things already that can help you check to see where students are at. We've activated some prior knowledge just to see where you were at. And now I'm doing a check because we did a little bit of learning. So I wanted to see where we were at. So our next big topic around the formative assessment process really lies with intentional planning. And when we talk about intentional planning, we're really talking about how we're going to design our lessons so that we are mindful about what evidence we're going to collect, when we're going to collect it, how often it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. We have to be mindful of all of these things. And one of my favorite researchers, Margaret Heritage, she talks about how there's really not a single way to collect formative evidence because formative assessment is not a specific kind of test, okay? It's a process, it's a practice, and you're already doing a lot of really, really good things because it was evident on the Jamboard. So we know that there are some routines and techniques that we use on the daily in the classroom to gather evidence. As part of intentional and purposeful planning, we want to make sure, though, that whatever we're engaging our students in is directly connected or aligned to that learning target. And it's not just an activity because the kids might like the activity. So we often gather information from our students by the discussions and the interactions that they have, right? So if we pose a juicy question and put our kids into small groups and have them discuss, we can listen in to see what they are thinking. Observations, I've done a lot of work around observations, observing in the classroom. Our eyeballs are such an underutilized tool and one that we really should be using more often. And you can create informal observation plans with students. It could be a small group of students. It could be all of your students. It could be just an individual student. We also look at student work. And this is one that yesterday we talked a little bit about it when we were looking at some of the science probes, but student work can reveal a lot of information about where students are at in their understanding aligned to the learning goal. But then we can actually engage in more interaction, more discussion, because we can prompt students to tell us more about their work just by the simple question. So tell me a little bit about what you've done here. And so if it wasn't evident in the task or the work sample, students can share with you what they were thinking. We can ask questions. And I love when teachers pose really juicy questions to students because it really gets them thinking and it allows students to engage in a discussion. So even if a student doesn't maybe have a complete answer, just mere act of listening to what other students have to say can help to build their own understanding. And having these conversations is practice our academic language. So if we're really working on using certain words or vocabulary, we can include that when we're asking our questions and asking students to engage in discussions. Activating prior knowledge is another really good way to find out what students know. And that's what I did with the Jamboard. I asked you a couple of questions just to kind of see where we were at. It's hard not knowing when you have a lot of different people coming in at different levels. So that's a really good way to gauge some information around their current level of understanding, but also it might uncover some misconceptions, which can also help us to design and tailor lessons. And then lastly, this peer and self-assessment. We can get a lot of information when students are engaged in a self-assessment of where they are at in relation to the learning goal, but also with what peers are saying about that too. So when we talk about purposeful and intentional planning, a lot of what we talk about around the formative assessment process happens in the planning stage, right? So we should include when we're planning a target for learning. So what is our learning goal? What instruction are we going to provide to our students? The what, when, how will the evidence be collected? And then considering the type of adjustment that might be made or carried out. So what I mean by this is if students are showing that they're really not understanding, my adjustment might be to go back and do a little bit of reteaching and then check again to see where they are at. My adjustment might not happen in that lesson. It might happen over the course of a couple of days, but we want to be mindful when we're planning that if the evidence warrants this, do I have the time to adjust, okay? And we'll say that my plan book, when I was a first year teacher, I was guilty of having a book that kind of looked like this. It wasn't very detailed at all because I thought as a first year teacher, I knew it all. And one of the things that I found myself guilty of is not having a backup plan. And so some of the things to consider when you're planning are to do a dry run of the plan. Does my technology work? If I'm going to use this digital tool, I want to make sure that it works. And if it doesn't work, do I have a plan B set aside just in case? Our planning has to happen in advance. I've been in classrooms where I can tell that the planning didn't happen. Sometimes that happens, and I've had things go wrong and I've tried to kind of work through them for the day, but we want to make sure because we only have time with our students that our planning must occur in advance. We want to make sure that our planning reflects the deep teacher knowledge of content, pedagogy, and the formative assessment process, but also of our students. We need to consider our students too. So we'll open it up and we can unmute because we're a small enough group, or if you want to put things in the chat, what might be the harm of a fly by the seat of your pants approach to planning and teaching? And then why is it crucial that we plan with purpose and intentionality? And this is a nice little cartoon. I like this. Long range planning isn't my style. I'm a fly by the seat of your pants kind of guy. So what might be the harm of this type of approach to planning and teaching? And then why is it crucial that we plan with purpose and intentionality?
Did you want us unmuting again?
We are small enough that we can unmute, or I'm going to offer a choice. If maybe you're not comfortable unmuting, you certainly put it in the chat as well.
Okay, well, I'll talk because it's faster and easier. I think fly by the seat of your pants approach to teaching and learning, or teaching and planning, forgive me, is harmful because you're going to end up leaving a lot more students behind than when you're intentionally planning, because then you can meet each person where they're at and you can bring all of the kids up a level. They may not be ever at the same level because some kids are faster than others, but our goal is supposed to be to reach all kids where they're at and take them to the next step up. You can't do that by flying by the seat of your pants. You're only teaching to a certain core center, and that's old school teaching. You can't do that. So now I'm going to hush and let other people speak or type.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay, and the other things that I noticed, if we're not planning ahead of time and really being intentional in what we're doing, we will get to the assessment at the end and we'll be like, wait a minute, that doesn't match what we taught, or the kids don't know that yet. I have seen that happen in situations, and that's just dreadful. You don't want that to happen.
No. And oftentimes, like a backwards design of planning, like if we know that these are our outcomes for the unit, and this is how we're going to assess, I'm going to design my lesson plans based on that. It doesn't mean I'm teaching to the test. It just means that I'm aligned with what's going to be asked of my students, so that there's not a mismatch of data, because that's harmful too. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for bringing that up. That's crucial. Anyone else?
Well, I know for me, because I have some ELLs, I'm doing a summer program right now. If I don't think about the plans, because I'm teaching math, if I don't think about the math concept prior to, I don't know, I'm not gonna be able to think about what differentiating he might need or she might need if they can't speak or understand my language. So I definitely learned a lot about like visuals and hand gestures. And if I didn't think about that prior to, I wouldn't have known how to differentiate my instruction for my ELL learners.
Or even what sentence might be beneficial to give them the language in order to engage in the task, right?
Yes. Okay,
I'm seeing some things in the chat. Yes, differentiate instruction. You cannot do it if you're just kind of flying. And it's crucial to meet the needs of all students. You need to know what you and the students are working towards and a way to check understood it. Yes, thank you, Cheryl. Yeah. It's very hard to fly by the seat of your pants. I mean, I don't know if you're a first-year teacher, a 30-year veteran teacher, we have to plan intentionally, and we have to plan with our students in mind. Yeah, we need an end goal to know what they will need to learn by the end of the lesson. Yes. And so utilizing those standards, aligning your lessons to your content standards, or which are broken down into learning targets, will help with that. Those are your end goals. Excellent. So when we think about our digital tools, sometimes we see that the digital tool is selected first in the planning. And this is something that might cause a bit of hiccup in your data collection or your evidence collecting, because it might not be the best tool suited for what you're trying to gather. So when we plan for our instruction, we know we're going to use a digital tool, we want to do the high quality planning first. This means we're selecting those content standards, we're creating those learning targets, and some school districts already have power standards and learning targets already done, and we're determining what the success criteria will be. What will success look like when I've met this learning goal? We plan for the formative assessment process, and then at the very end, we select the digital tool that's going to help us elicit that evidence in the best way. And so those first four arrows there, it's not unique to the virtual or the face-to-face learning environment, right? And this was some of the things that we talked about in yesterday's session, that with virtual or not virtual formative assessment, it's the same, right? We engage it in the same way, but we have to be really mindful and intentional about what that looks like. So when we are selecting our tech tool or our digital tool to collect evidence, we need to consider what is efficient, what is practical, but really what's going to give us the evidence that we need to make those the best instructional decision, right? So one of the ways in which we can do this is we can utilize a planning template like this, and this will help support the formative assessment process, but it'll also help you to think about where in my lesson sequence am I going to provide feedback to students? What questions or questioning strategies am I going to use? So this is a very detailed planning template, and Jason's going to drop the link into the chat for us. But it's something that you might consider using as you're planning out a unit of instruction. I'm not sure, this is a lot to ask of a teacher to do on a daily basis. But if you use this as a unit planning template, it can help design your lessons. All right, so the part we've all been waiting for is how do we select the digital tool? So again, we really have to be thinking about when are we going to elicit evidence? What are we going to use? How am I going to do it? How often is this going to happen? And then thinking about an adjustment that I might make. Is it going to happen immediately? Is it something that could wait till the next lesson, the next day? Or is it going to happen over the course of a couple of different lessons? And then thinking also about how am I going to provide students with feedback so that we can all move towards that intended learning goal. So you can see surrounding my Bitmoji head that there's a ton of digital tools out there, right? It's almost overwhelming. And especially when we moved to the remote teaching space last March, we were inundated with the amount of tech tools that were coming to our inbox of things that we should be using. And so sometimes teachers can feel really overwhelmed about which ones to choose. So what I've done is I've actually broken it down into a couple of different tools that you can use depending on when or what strategy you're going to elicit evidence. So if we are activating prior knowledge, and this really helps us to know where students are at, like their depth of understanding, but also even to see any misconceptions, or even just it helps us to kind of give us a starting place. These are some tools that I would recommend you using. You could use Kahoot. The Mentimeter is a great one. If you create a quick poll everywhere is very similar to Mentimeter. You could do a Jamboard. The Jamboard is what we were on in the beginning with where you had to move your dot. Or even if you are a Google district, even Microsoft has their own version of these, but you can even create a Google slide or a Google form and ask a couple questions. So lots of different ways we activate prior knowledge. Quick writes, we do some brainstorming, we can show a video, we can provide anticipation guides, or we can do a poll or survey. And the other one, remember these are all of the techniques and strategies that we already do in the classroom. We have dialogue, we engage in discourse, we have discussions. And this allows us to really create a better understanding of what kids know, some of the strategies that they are using as learners, and how they are thinking about our content. So some of the ways in which we can do this, we could use Flipgrid, and that's a nice digital tool that can record kids. Kids can make videos. We can utilize the breakout room in our platform, whatever platform we're using, if we're using Teams or Google Meet, or even in our Zoom. Vocaroo, I put Vocaroo on here, and Vocaroo is it's a free, but you can actually record your audio and you can send somebody the link. So even if you couldn't have a face-to-face discussion, you could certainly have an asynchronous audio discussion using Vocaroo. Again, questioning, when we're asking those juicy questions of our students to explore their thinking, what are some things that we can use? Again, we can use our Google Docs. Maybe we create a slide for each student to access, and we put the question on it, and then students go into their assigned slide and they type in it or put in pictures or videos. We could use Mentimeter. Padlet's another good one because Padlet allows us to create kind of almost like Pinterest, but it's like a board that you can actually pin or post different things to. You can almost use it like a discussion board. ClassKick is another good one because it allows each student to have their own space to work, but then a teacher can actually view what's happening within their whole class. So they could actually see a class view of it and how students are working. And then Jamboard again. So some of these actually do repeat and they have multiple uses. It's how you use them to gather that evidence is what's important. So around questioning, we want to make sure that we plan those questions in advance. Fly by the seat questioning, you might find, and actually what research has found is that most teachers actually ask and answer their questions in less than 3 seconds. So it's really, really, really important that we plan those in advance and that we utilize wait time, and wait time in a virtual space is really, really tough. But we can do it, but we want to make sure that our questions encourage higher order thinking. We want to stay Even though we want a range of questions, we don't always want to live in that simple recall or knowledge rung of questioning. We want to get higher to that analysis and evaluation. And this helps other students too engage with each other and to build upon their own knowledge. Observation and analysis of student work. Again, you're seeing some of the same tools, but we can learn a lot about student work. Just a drawing, some diagrams, graphics, and I will fix that slide. Graphic, concept maps, investigations, writing, lab reports. So there's lots of different ways that we could look into student work. And how could we do this? We could use Google Docs or the Microsoft Docs that are in the cloud. We can use Flipgrid again, where students are making videos. Book Creator is another one that I really like because a student can actually create their own book and use it almost like a digital portfolio. Or you could create a class book and each student has a page that they could work on and design how they want to design. Whiteboard.chat is a really fun one. It's essentially a whiteboard, but there's a lot of really cool tools in there. So if students are working in task-based instruction in mathematics, there's actually mathematics tools available for them to use so they can actually build diagrams. And again, all of these, I like to show things that are free. Okay, peer and self-assessment. So this is where we are providing opportunities to our students so that they have an idea of where they are at in their own learning and that they've internalized the learning, but it also provides us into some insight into what students are saying or writing about each other's work. And so students can engage in peer assessment and self-assessment through Google Docs or the Microsoft Suite. Whiteboard.chat's a nice one because they can comment on each other's work. Again, Flipgrid, where they're making videos, you can do peer feedback in those videos. Jamboard's another good one because you can add a sticky note to somebody's work. If you have 20 students in a classroom, each student gets their own board. You can pair up partners. So there's lots of different ways in which these can be used to help with that peer and self-assessment. Okay, and I would be remiss if I did not talk about feedback, even though it's not one of the techniques that we use to gather evidence, it's one in which keeps moving the formative assessment process along. And so feedback is anything that we can provide to students, not necessarily from the teacher, but it could be from other peers, that helps move the students forward in reaching their learning goal. So we want things to be actionable, specific, timely, but they also need to be, the feedback also needs to be aligned to the learning goal. And so some of the ways in which you can give effective feedback using digital tools, Vocaroo is a good one because it can record a voice. And what research has found is that a voice recording is sometimes more often better received than a typed comment because we can hear the tone or inflections of the voice. Mote is another good one that will record voice, but it will also provide a written out, a text, the text of the voice comment. And if you use the paid version, if you have ELLs, the paid version also offers a translation service. So you can give feedback to a student and they can translate it to their first language. So all of these are, Floop's another good one too. Floop, this is where you can upload student work to the platform and that teachers can use text or audio using that platform too. And actually teachers can build a database of comments. So if you teach English in the high school and you're noticing a trend in comments, you can create a database and use those comments over and over again. If you're interested, and Jason can drop the link to the article, Dr. Gabrion and I co-authored an article called Feedback as a Connector in Remote Learning Environments. And this is how the role of relationships, the role of the relationship between teacher and student to student play in remote settings, but how important it is to foster relationships so that students are better able to receive that feedback and they're more likely to use it. So this is an article that you can check out, and there's lots of links in there too that are helpful. So I want to give you some time, and I know we're coming close to the end, but I want to give you some time to explore a digital tool or two of your choice and consider how one of the tools could support eliciting evidence and how it could be incorporated into your practice. So all of those techniques that we do on a daily basis, all of those things, now we're just weaving in a digital tool that is going to help collect that information in a way that we can use to adjust instruction if necessary and give feedback. So I'm going to give you a few moments to kind of explore some of those tools. And there are two things that, there's two links that Jason's going to drop in. I'm going to show you in just a second. I created a list of the tools that I talked about today. So there's this first one here. So you don't have to go searching in that PowerPoint. They are all linked here for you, and with a little picture of what it is and then a little description. So you can go ahead and explore through here. There's also another one specific to feedback. And oh, here it is. And this is the one that's in the feedback article. So this is the tool. These are tools that are specific to feedback, and there are some duplicates. And so what Laura and I did was we gave a tutorial or an example of how it could be used. So you have actually two sheets, one that's just digital tools and how to get there. And then this one is specific for feedback. So I'm going to give you about, never enough time, and I apologize, but I'm going to give you about 3 minutes and then I'll pull you back. So it's never enough time. An hour goes by so fast, and I want to honor your time, especially on a Friday. Before we leave today, we're going to revisit our Jamboard. And there's just one question that I'm inviting you to answer. And the question is, what are you packing up and taking with you today? And it could be something new that you learned. It could be an idea or strategy you might try, or a question that you still have. And so Jason's going to plop the link to the Jamboard in the chat, and you're going to hover over to the third board, the one that has the cute little suitcases that we're traveling with, we're packing up. And I invite you to use the sticky note or the text box to think about what is something that you are taking with you today. Maybe you're creating a commitment to yourself to try something the first week of school, or embed something into a lesson. All right, these are really good. Using Vocaroo, reviewing some of those tools on the resources sheets. And we will definitely send you the links to everything that we used today, so you don't have to worry to try and scramble to get them out of the chat. They were going to come to you in an email along with this recording so that you can explore on your own. We'll make sure that you have everything that you need. And if you have any questions, Jason and I are happy to hang on for a little bit if you have some questions, but I will share with you, we do have some upcoming professional learning around feedback, if that's something that you're interested in. It's using multimodalities to build connections with students through feedback. It's a 3-part series, and it's starting August 17th, completely free and completely virtual. And this is how do you build those connections with students through teacher-led, peer-led, and self-led feedback. And then if you are interested in any of the other Blitz sessions, we have one each day throughout the month of August, as well as a PD request form that Jason's going to drop in, and the link to the PD request form. So if you thought this was really interesting, or if you found some of these things really, really helpful, and you want to bring this to your district or school, we can customize it to your building needs. So that's what the PD request form is for. So Jason and I thank you.